So thank you for joining me today. Today is session 1, how to add a company and a contact to your REA database. So you should be able to see my screen here. And right now we have a contact up. And we're going to start off adding just a basic contact to the database. And then we'll go into adding a company and adding multiple contacts to the same company and multiple companies to the same organization. Or companies can get a little bit more complex than we have really the capabilities to go into at this moment, but we'll show you what most people use in terms of the contacts and companies and how most people utilize it and would get the most benefit out of it. So to start off, we're going to add a brand new contact with a company that's not currently in our database. So we're just going to start completely fresh here. So the first thing to do is hit the new record button. There's a few different places you can go to add a contact. So if you have your contact screen open, there's this button right here that the arrow is pointing at there. We'll add a new contact to the database, as well as being able to hit this drop-down box here that says new and selecting contact from the drop-down list. Either one of these is going to do the exact same thing, so just go ahead and hit contact here, and it's going to bring up a window that says contact details. So this is where you fill out the basic information for the contact. So the full name, first name, last name, salutation, and so on. So the first thing, go ahead and add the full name. So let's say that this person is named Harold Johnson. So I'm just going to go ahead and click in here, Harold Johnson, and hit tab to go to the next field, and it's automatically going to separate the first and last name. Now if you also have like a middle initial or a designation, it'll actually take that into account when you do the first and last name. So like let's say I'm just going to go ahead and remove this and start over. So let's say it's Harold L. Johnson, CCIM. We're going to add an agent to the database. Well, we can go ahead and Harold L. Johnson, CCIM. When I hit tab, it's still going to separate just Harold and Johnson. So it does have some intelligence in recognizing the name, which part's the name, which part's a middle initial, and a designation. Here we can go and add the salutation. So Mr., Doctor, whatever the person is. So in this case, we're going to go with Mr. Here is greeting. Now, greeting is primarily going to be used for when you're doing mailers. So this is what's going to show up oftentimes when you do a mailer is what it shows in the greeting here. So you could say, like, let's say he goes by Harry, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in here for the greeting. You can also change the greeting to be the last name, so like Mr. Johnson, Dr. Smith, and so on. And next we'll go ahead and add the title. So let's just call Harold Johnson the CEO. Next, we can add in here the address section. Now, if a contact is being added to a company that already exists in your database, you can actually use this drop-down box here to select the company, so you don't have to type all the information in if you're adding multiple contacts to a company. However, there's an easier way to do that as well, so I'll talk about that when I get to the companies. So first, we could just go ahead and type in the name of the company, and let's call it Harold Johnson Enterprises, just for simplicity's sake. And 1337 North 1st Street, Suite 202. Okay, so when you get to the zip code field, if you enter the zip code, so let's say 85295, and we go to the next field, just hit tab, it's automatically going to fill it out with the city and state based on that zip code for you. So you don't have to type that in each time. And sometimes you'll have zip codes that have multiple cities associated with them, and it'll give you actually a pop-up table with the different options for that. Next, we have contact types. So REA is split into 6 primary contact types, and then, of course, you can use groups, which we'll talk about in a later session, to kind of subcategorize within those. So those primary types are investor, agent, personal, tenant, vendor, and prospect. So he's a CCIM, so obviously he's going to be at least some form of agent, so we're just going to go ahead and select agent here. And I'm just going to go ahead and fill out the rest of the information here. Okay, so when you're ready, just go ahead and hit OK. And it's going to, since we added a contact to a company that does not exist in our database already, it automatically came up asking if we want to create a new company record for this contact. Now, if we would have added a company that already exists in our database, it actually would have come up with a selectable list of those companies. But since we are adding a brand new contact to a brand new company, that's not necessary. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit yes to this. This is the simplest way to add a company from the contact. And you can also add a contact from the company. So we're going to add a few more contacts to this Harold Johnson Enterprises company in a moment. So it automatically fills out with the information that we filled in. So it assumes that the address that you put on the contact is their company address. So you actually have their office address. And of course, you can change the phone number. Let's say that the main office number is actually 1200. And then we can just hit OK. However, one thing I like to do when I add a company is where the email is. Most of the time, the company itself doesn't have an email address. So I like to take advantage of the field to remind me of what the normal scheme is for their email addresses. What I mean by that is, like, for example, people at Marcus Millichap, their address is firstname.lastname@marcusmillichap.com. Well, in this case, with haroldjohnson.com, we see H. Johnson, so it's going to be first initial last name. So what I do when that's the case is I'll put F, so first initial, last. So that way each time I add a new contact to the company, as we'll see in a moment, it'll come up with that in the email, so I know I can just take out the first initial from the first name and the last name, put them together, and have the email address. Doesn't work 100% of the time because sometimes there's going to be multiple people at the company with the same name and so on, but it gives you a nice kind of starting point to at least guess at what the email address is going to be if you don't have a specific email address for all the contacts. So let's hit OK, and then just hit blank fields only here. And then we have our brand new contact record in the database. Now, of course, we could just keep adding contacts by hitting the new contact button, and I'm going to do that again just to add another contact to Harold Johnson Enterprises. So let's say that Mary Jones also works for the company. Well, I just hit the new record button and just type in Mary Jones. And here where it says address, I said you could drop this down and do select company. And I could just type in part of the company name to search for that company and have it fill in the information. So we have Harold Johnson Enterprises. Just choose that, hit OK, and it'll ask if we want to fill in the fields from the company record. So I can just hit blank fields only so it doesn't overwrite anything if I already typed stuff in. It automatically put in the work number, and I can just backspace a couple here and say, well, her extension is 1213. And then, like I said, it fills in the email address from the company. So I see F last, so I could just say, oh, okay, well, I could just fill that in with M. Jones and hit OK. So it gets really fast when you're adding multiple contacts to the same company to do that. So now we have two contacts at Harold Johnson Enterprises that we've added in the brief span of a few minutes. Now, if we wanted to add a lot of contacts to the company, it's a lot easier to do that from the actual company record. So REA is split into multiple different tables. If you go here to the view, you'll see that you can either view all of your contacts or view them separately as investors, tenants, agents, vendors, personal contacts, or prospects. There's also an entire table for companies, one for properties and sales comps, one for spaces and lease comps, and one for projects. So we can actually go right to the company here. Or an easier way, when you're on the contact, you can just click on the company tab, and then in the box here, when you double click, it'll bring up that linked record. So if I wanted to go back to Harold Johnson, I'm just going to go here, double click here, and it'll bring up that record in the company. So the company record is going to look slightly different. It's going to have the address of the company, the phone number, and the email address that we put specifically for the company. And then here under the company info, where most of the contact fields would be, instead it's going to have listings of different properties, spaces, user-defined fields, and then a section for contacts where you can see all of the contacts that are associated with that company. So we just added Harold Johnson and Mary Jones. If we wanted to keep adding more contacts to this company, we could just go right to this company and just keep hitting Add Contact, and it'll automatically fill in with all those fields from the company. So we could just start adding other people rather quickly like this. Hit OK, And so we could just keep adding multiple contacts to a company rather quickly by this method. Now, if you wanted to add a brand new company and associate it with an already existing company, so we have Harold Johnson Enterprises, for example, but let's say that they have a division also in San Diego. Well, when you add a new company to your database, you can, of course, go here to New and choose Company. There's a few different fields here that you can fill in. Now, there's the basic company name, but then there's also organization and subsidiary. Companies works in kind of a hierarchy structure, so you'll have organization at the top level, and then organization split into subsidiary. So, like, let's say you have two different departments that within that organization, and then each of those two departments has three companies, three different offices. So company would be kind of the office level. Subsidiary is not always used, so a lot of the times you'll only have the different organization and company, but subsidiary gives you a separate level. So, for example, I wanted to add another company for Harold Johnson Enterprises. So what I do is here under organization, just make sure I type Harold Johnson Enterprises, and then I can differentiate it here under companies. So let's say Harold Johnson Enterprises San Diego, and that office is going to be at, say, 1445 Kettner Boulevard, 92101, and hit OK. Well, now if we go here to the org chart, we actually see the different offices start to show up. So we have the one in Gilbert and the one in San Diego now. And if we see here, we have it marked on the company, so we only show the contacts within that company here. Now, if we go back to click on the Gilbert, Arizona one, we see the three contacts there. You can also show all contacts for the entire organization. So let's say we started adding contacts to the San Diego office. Just click on it there and click Add Contact, and it'll fill it in. And I'm just going to add Tim Cray. And so we can start adding contacts to the different offices here. Now you can get a lot more in-depth with this as well, adding different subsidiaries. So let's say they also had a canned foods division. I don't know, that makes absolutely no sense, but just for argument's sake, we could make another Harold Johnson Enterprises canned foods division. And let's say the canned foods is at 1440 Pine Street in Seattle. And you'll notice that there's actually now going to be multiple headings. So with no subsidiary, we have the Gilbert office, which is the corporate headquarters, and we also have the San Diego office, which is just, let's say, a separate version of the corporate office in San Diego. Then we have the canned foods division. We can start adding different offices based on that. And so all of that division happens from typing in the same organization and subsidiary. So if I wanted to add another organization, let's say a Phoenix version of the canned foods, just once again type Harold Johnson Enterprises canned foods division. Let's say Chandler Heights, sure. And you see there was actually multiple different options from the post office. Sometimes it'll be just different spellings of the same thing when you have multiples come up from the same zip code. Sometimes the same zip code will have like multiple towns and such. So just hit OK, and we start to see the organization chart grow. We now have 2 under the canned foods division and 2 under no subsidiary. And of course, we can keep adding more and more to that list. So that pretty much covers adding a contact and a company to the database. Our next session is going to talk about how to associate these contacts and companies with the properties and spaces, the leasable spaces in your database. So that will be on Wednesday, and we'll continue on from there.